Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are watching us from. Well, warm welcome to all the panelists whom I will introduce in a minute, and to our audience that is following us live. The session will be recorded and made available to those who miss it today. It will be on our event platform. My name is Gerard de Graaf. I'm a director at the European Commission in Brussels. I deal with digital transformation and look particularly at the interaction between the twin transitions, the digital and the green transitions, and with also a particular focus on circular economy issues, circular electronics and digital product passports. And I'm really honored and pleased to moderate today's session that will be interactive. There will be no speeches, just questions and answers, statements, and of course, we're very interested also in active participation by the audience. Let me introduce the distinguished panel of speakers to you, starting with Matt Britton. Matt Britton is the president of Google's business and operations in Europe, the Middle East and Africa. He joined Google in 2007 as a managing director, Google UK, and then became President of Business and Operations in EMEA in 2014. Before joining Google, Matt worked at McKinsey. He's a trustee of several important charities like the Climate Group and Media Trust. Welcome, Matt. We're looking forward to your contribution. I think we're waiting still for Luis Neves, whom I will try to introduce later when he joins. He's also one of the panelists. But before that, I will introduce Nicole Robertson, who is the Vice President for Environmental, Social and Governance Agenda across Nokia. Nokia has been recognized as one of the world's most ethical companies by Ethisphere, and is also included in the Climate A list by the CDP for their work on and particularly disclosure of climate change information. Welcome, Nicole.
Good afternoon.
Last but definitely not least, Bill Tai, a venture capitalist joining us from California with over 20 initial public offerings behind him that have come from his early stage backing. Interestingly, also in the technology we're using today in Zoom video. He's the founding chairman of MetaGood, which is a non-fungible token organization for the social good. He is also actively involved in the mining company Hut8, who is the world's largest listed blockchain mining company. He holds a PhD on innovation and economic development and chairs Acti Global, which is a collective of athletes, conservationists, technologists, artists, and innovators supporting environmental conservation and economic empowerment via entrepreneurship. A few words to kick off the meeting. The session will focus particularly on the nexus between digital and the green transitions, and particularly on the focus on the positive contribution of digital technologies for sustainability. I'd like to invite the audience to use Slido. It is on the left bottom of your screen, the details to ask questions or to provide comments, and we will try, of course, to at least put some of the questions or comments to our panelists. There's also a few questions to the audience, a few polling questions to the audience that will appear shortly, and we would, of course, invite you to look at those, think a bit about them, and then answer them, and we'll come back to the answers at the end of the session. A few words about the EU leadership. I don't think it needs much introduction. The EU has committed to climate neutrality by 2050. It has the ambition to lead the green and digital twin transitions and to harness the benefits from it. The European Green Deal was published in December 2019. We published a digital strategy shortly thereafter, and we made very, very clear links between the two. The European Council, the heads of state and government of the European Union also are strongly behind using digital to contribute to combating and mitigating climate change, exploiting the opportunities. There are different sets of European Council conclusions that refer to the important role of digital for climate change. Same is true for all the member states. They have all committed to leading the digital transformation, using also, for example, green procurement and other measures that are available to them. In terms of ICT enablement, there is a simple truth that there is already a lot of technology that is available to cut CO2 emissions. It's more a matter of deployment of implementation, and of course, every day new technologies come to the market. The technologies of today, it's been estimated, could already, if applied widely and smartly, reduce 20% of total CO2 emissions. But that, of course, means we have to spread those technologies across different sectors: energy networks, transport, buildings, agriculture, manufacturing, and smart cities. But as we do so, we also need to make sure that the ICT sector itself keeps its emissions in check. Whilst ICT is an important part of the solution, there is no success without digital. The emissions for the ICT sector are already of the order of 2 to 3%, and they're on a rising trajectory. So there is an absolute necessity also to control and reduce, where possible, the emissions of the ICT sector itself. Both Nokia and Google are founding fathers of the European Green Digital Coalition, which was established in March of this year. And the European Green Digital Coalition consists of a large number of leading companies that have committed to net zero by 2040, and at the same time are investing and working very closely to improve the metrics about how technology can contribute effectively to combating and mitigating climate change, because there's a lot of kind of still differentiation. There's a lot of figures that are being used that are not always kind of reliable. So we definitely need a single metric. Before we start with the session, I'd like to, because I see Luis Neves has joined us in the meantime. So let me introduce Luis. Luis is the global CEO of GESI. It's the Global Enabling Sustainability Initiative. And he has been a leading figure in the sustainable ICT arena for over 15 years. He was also the chairman of GESI, senior vice president, and many of you may know him as the force behind the well-known GESI Smart Report series. Luis has held many important committee appointments related to climate change in the UN, the European Round Table, and in the ICC Commission on Environment and others. And we're very glad you made it on time, Luis, to join us for this panel. I think we're ready to start the session, and I'd like to start with Nicole, and I'd like to start also to be very practical. Can you provide, and the question is to all of the panelists, inspiring examples of digital solutions that deliver positive climate benefits, and if they could be kind of spread more widely, could really achieve a significant impact?
Yeah, thank you. Absolutely. And I think, if I may be so bold, just to talk a little bit first about your introduction, where you talked about the twin transformation of digital and green. And I would actually say I believe that connectivity, digitalization, and climate action are actually inseparable. I believe we can't achieve one without the other. And we need to bring this nexus much stronger to the fore to acknowledge the enablement impact that digitalization has, and the challenge we have facing climate together. I don't believe is possible without digitalization. And if I look at what that means for Nokia, at Nokia, we create the world's networks and the software that optimizes them. And what we see is that the speed and latency of 5G provides a real opportunity for us to digitalize asset-intensive sectors, like you were mentioning, around energy, manufacturing, transportation, and agriculture, so that they can transform sustainably through more efficient use and reuse of the world's resources. And one great example there, I think, is AeroFarms. So AeroFarms is a vertical farming company that Nokia Bell Labs has been working with looking at how to apply precision farming in their environment. And what we see is that 30 to 40% of the world's food is lost or wasted during production, making up 8 to 10% of greenhouse gas emissions. So we've been working with aerofarms on precision farming using 5G, digital sensors, and AI-based analytics to minimize pesticide and fertilizer usage, as well as reducing water and energy usage, and doing that by still maximizing yield and reducing wastage. And if we look at Bell Labs consulting studies, that we would estimate that 15 to 25% of all farms, if they were to adopt precision farming by 2030, it would lead to increases in yields of up to 300 million tons each year, and nonetheless a reduced water usage of up to 150 billion cubic meters annually. So I think it's a real opportunity to have significant transformation of agriculture. Another example we could call on is manufacturing. And in manufacturing, we see is responsible for 16 gigatons of CO2 every year. And at Nokia, we've invested in smart manufacturing with our own factory in Oulu in Finland, recognized by the World Economic Forum as Lighthouse. And here we've used digitalization and automation and other smart solutions to help us improve sustainability, whilst at the same time increasing productivity by up to 30% a year. And studies suggest that annual productivity and energy saving gains of up to 10 to 20% can be realized by the conversion to smart manufacturing over time. So I think those are just two examples maybe to share, but as you mentioned rightly, this is equally applicable to smart cities when we think about transportation, when we think about ports and logistics, for example, as well as energy sectors. So I think the role that we have in digitalizing some of these asset-heavy industries is really significant if we want to genuinely solve the climate challenge.
Thank you, Nicole. I mean, it's interesting that you started with agriculture. I mean, I have been working in digital, the digital director general in the Commission for 10 years, and we never had much contact with our colleagues in DG Agriculture, actually never. But the last year or two, I mean, it's probably the director general with whom we have most contact because of, say, the very significant opportunities to use digital technologies in order, as you say, to reduce fertilizer or pesticides. So it's really interesting and fascinating what happens in that area. Let me also use now, because I think we're touching upon the first question for the audience, is like, in which sector do you think these technologies have the greatest potential to bring benefits? And then the second question, which we would like to have your views on, is, do you think that technology has a bigger impact, like negative impact, than its positive impact on kind of reducing emissions in other sectors? So if you could think a little bit about this, and we'll come back to the results of this polling at the end. And now I go to Louise, but maybe more from the perspective of JZ as an organization. I mean, how do you monitor these effects? I mean, what kind of examples can you see, and from the perspective of JZ, which ones would you want to highlight from the perspective from where you come from?
Well, thank you so much, Gerard, and my apologies for being a little bit late. I'm sitting in Lisbon at the beginning of the Web Summit, at the Corporate Innovation Summit, and by coincidence, I was moderating a workshop just before this call, but I'm happy that I managed to be together with you. So to your question, we as an industry initiative, we have been looking broadly to the sector, to the industry, how the industry is impacting different sectors in making them more efficient. And this conversation in GESI started in 2008. In 2008, there was a very critical report from Gartner criticizing our industry for its own footprinting. And the Gartner findings were that 2% of the global emissions were coming from the digital industry sector. And at GESI, we were a little bit surprised with that figure. And we said, okay, this cannot be. We need to verify this figure. And then we embarked in a journey whereby we engaged McKinsey to run a report for us that was then named the Smart 2020. And we asked McKinsey three fundamental questions. One was to verify our footprinting. The other one was to look at the enabling impact of digital technologies in other industry sectors. And the third question was about the business value. And to our, not really to our surprise, but the outcomes of the report was that the enabling capacity of digital technologies was 5 times higher or bigger than our own footprinting. And our own footprinting by that time was confirmed to be 2% of the global emissions by McKinsey. And we have done that exercise in 2012 with Boston Consulting. In 2015, we did the same exercise with the Sensor Strategy around the same 3 questions. And what have we seen? We have seen that while our footprint, our global footprint remains more or less at the same level, I think the reason for that is also because global emissions are growing much, much faster. Is not probably only because of our own, let's say, synergies and efficiencies. So our own footprinting is still remaining more or less around the 2%, but the enabling impact of the digital technologies moved from 1 to 5 to 1 to 10. So in 2015, we calculated that digital technologies could reduce 20% of the global emissions, which represents the decoupling from carbon emissions from growth. And this was a fantastic outcome. And those efficiencies, we see them in every single industry sector, from power, agriculture, logistics, mobility, and so on and so on. So every single sector of the industry is impacted by digital technologies in a very, very strong manner. So with all this evidence, we decided in 2019 to go back again and look at the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, and we commissioned Deloitte to run a report for us that lasts 7 months to produce. We evaluated 500 case studies across the globe from different industry sectors, from different verticals. And the conclusion again of the report was that digital technologies will impact 22% of the Sustainable Development Goals in a positive manner, and they will reduce the downtrend in 23% of that. So overall, the world needs digital for good. The world needs digital for a more sustainable living. Digital technologies will impact every single sector. They will enable every single industry sector to become more efficient. I'm not saying that everything is good. We have our own issues. We need to take care of our energy consumption. We need to take care of our circularity of our products. We need to look into the digital divide. We need to look into our supply chain impacts and scope 3 emissions of our partners in our industry. But overall, digital technologies will be a key and fundamental driver for climate change. So if COP26 does not acknowledge this, it will be a huge mistake. Without digital, the world will not remain on a sustainable track. And it's important that from an European perspective, the European Commission takes leadership here. And I think the European Green Digital Coalition is a fantastic step really to look into that and to look how can we really measure in a more consistent way, in a more, let's say, serious, if I may say so, way, how digital technologies will be impacting every single industry sector, and then we use that as a standard in the European taxonomy really to move forward.
Thank you, Luis. That's an uplifting message. We need more digital, otherwise we're not going to get there. Matt, from your perspective, also as a global company, what do you see as the most promising examples of digital solutions that deliver these positive climate benefits?
Yeah, thank you, Howard. And it's great to be joining you. I'm actually in Glasgow, partly obviously because of the urgency, but I also want to underscore really what Luis just said about the collective nature of our response. And it's, as you mentioned, Nicole's organization and ours both signed up as members of the EU Green Digital Coalition because we believe that only by working between governments and companies and capital and communities can we tackle the big challenges ahead of us. But you asked a very precise question around specific and practical examples. A few things, Nicole mentioned vertical farming and agriculture, and I do think, we're seeing the application of digital technologies to the natural environment in ways we've never done before, thanks to the advent of artificial intelligence and machine learning. So, we're working on, for example, flood forecasting. using topographic mapping, Google Earth, these kinds of imaging technologies, along with AI technology, to really start to look at forecasting more accurately and in a very timely way where issues might arise. Same thing around wildfires, which we've seen horrifically devastating impacts across continents this year, wildfire detection and management. And also working at the moment with over 500 cities using our Environmental Insights Explorer to try to understand where's the potential for solar, what's happening with air quality. These are some of the ways in which we can apply digital technologies to our natural and to our urban environment for good. And I'm sure we can go on to discuss more, so I'll sort of pause there, but I feel, as Luis is, very optimistic and also agree with the view that, you know, this is absolutely fundamental technology. We've reached the point where over half the planet is connected, and we might come on to some of the ways in which digital technology can help communities and families make better decisions as well. But I think there are lots of promising examples that are going to be essential if we're going to address this crisis in the timely way and in the collaborative way that we need to.
Thank you, Matt. Bill, you are kind of very much involved in early stage startups, venture capital, etc. What do you see coming down the pike in terms of new technologies? I mean, exciting companies that you think can become really successful global companies with advanced technologies.
You know, we're right on an edge of quite a massive inflection point that I think we're all actually living right now in the metaverse. And none of you probably think that you're in the metaverse already. But think about what we're doing right now from all the different places we are around the globe on this call. We're all using Zoom. We've been digitally transported, right? And I don't know how many 100 million or billion air miles Zoom has saved over the last 2 or 3 years, but it's probably that order of magnitude. And that carbon footprint is gone. It's been saved, right? And obviously there's a set of new technologies that I'm focused on that include, you know, metaverse, the blockchain, and expressions of the blockchain that lead to economic productivity in the metaverse that were not able to be used before until the blockchain existed. If you think about the things that are happening today with cryptocurrency and NFTs, you know, obviously we're seeing this explosion in NFTs in a way that nobody has seen economically before. You know, last year, I think the value of NFTs was around $380 million. This year to date, it's between 10 and $14 billion. Never before in human history have we seen an economic wave of that kind of, you know, 30x a year revenue size. Now, is it a little bit speculative? Hard to know, but it hasn't happened before. So what is happening and how does that apply here? You know, so I think as you look at what NFTs are, these are blockchain expressions that allow communities of interest to rally around causes and to rally around things of interest. They're kind of an extension of a pre-existing human behavior that people already understand. You know, I don't know how many people on this audience have a Starbucks card, for example, but if you think about Starbucks as a brand, they probably have, you know, 20 million people and $2 billion of points floating around. They are a nation with their own virtual currency. So some of the things that I'm working on now are basically leveraging that type of behavior in the creation of virtual nations to support causes. I'm chairman, for example, of a company called MetaGood. And what that is it's a company that allows NFTs to be used to support causes by ad hoc communities of interest that can spring up. We launched, for example, the first ever all on-chain in a single transaction collection of NFTs a month and a half ago. That drop, which is something called on-chain monkeys or on-chain monkey singular, in a month and a half has trading value of something like, you know, 12, 13, 14 million dollars, and a community of 20,000 people that have sprung up that are active on a Discord group supporting different causes. You know, for example, the UN has this project called GigaConnect, and the community rallied to auction off items, NFT items, to generate capital for that project. You'll see on November 5th, so for those of you in Glasgow, our team is lighting up the Armadillo building where the COP26 is being held with NFTs from a generative artist named Alexis Andre, very famous French artist, that will be a rallying cry for people to support environmental and social causes with a community of interest that can apply NFTs to fund those. So I think, we're moving in a world today where the digital technologies are not just building out infrastructure, but they're serving as a fabric to organize, to fund, to support, and to drive positive change. And I think it's an important inflection point for this world, because if you think about the forward-going economy, I don't know how many people are working at these companies like Matt is at Google or Facebook or, you name it, the 20 or 30 really dynamic leading companies in technology. But if you think about what defines economic productivity today, it's a bunch of people pushing ones and zeros around on a screen, right? It's a very different kind of economy that we're entering compared to anything we've had in the past 1,000 years. So I think the digital is a part of our future. It's far more efficient. And I agree with your statement that COP26, I think it was Louise that said that COP26 needs to make sure that digital is part of that agenda. It's the way to go, and we're already on that path.
Thank you, Bill. I think there's a whole discussion that maybe not for today, but about blockchain and how to make blockchain more sustainable. But that's deserves like a session in itself. Let's move to the next question, and also still encouraging all of those participating to put questions into Slido. The next question is maybe, I think it's clear that Glasgow is about more. More needs to be done than we've been doing and we've been committing to until now. Now let's turn to your companies. I think you've all committed to, at least the two companies on the panel, to be net zero by 2040. You also represent, Louise, quite a lot of companies that are working with your organization. Bill, you are actively involved in the community. What more? Can you do more? What more can be done? So rather than saying what are you already doing, what more would you need to be doing in order to achieve those really ambitious targets that are in front of us?
I'll start I'll start. While the blockchain thing could be a whole nother program, I'll just hit at a high level. One of the misconceptions I think about blockchain infrastructure in general, particularly the energy intensive ones like Bitcoin and Ethereum today. Ethereum is changing to a different architecture, which is less mining, running machinery intensive. But if you think about the economics of generating electricity and the various sources, whether it's burning coal on one end of the spectrum to hydroelectric on the other, and in between there's solar and wind and other things, it's actually today cheaper and more economically efficient to run things on green than it is to dig up coal. If you think about trying to generate electricity for a turbine, for example, and digging coal out of the ground and transporting it and cleaning the furnaces and moving it around, it generally is going to be 6 cents a kilowatt hour. Hydro can be done at 1.5 cents a kilowatt hour or less, depending on the amount you put up for the spindles running under the water. So you're going to be 4 times as efficient from an energy perspective if you go green running your blockchain infrastructure than if you don't go green. So market forces are going to force everybody to go green to stay alive. And because the chunk sizes in the blockchain infrastructure are so large, it produces the demand that allows people to decide to put up the CapEx for things like hydro. And then I think in blockchains in general, the community is taking care of itself, and it is moving away, generally speaking, from energy intensive mining and the writing of the blocks to proof of stake architectures like, Flow blockchain, for example, a company called Dapper Labs that runs the infrastructure for NBA Top Shot and the NFL and the Liga for their NFTs, one of the largest NFT markets in the world. They're a proof of stake. They can do 10 million NFTs for $30 of carbon credit. So it's a very, very different world we're moving to that will apply to all of the things eventually when the world goes DeFi and banking and moves our traditional financing mechanisms onto blockchains instead of the older way of doing them in big data centers.
Thank you, Bill. I mean, it's a good overview of developments in technology. Let's keep the answers a bit shorter because we're running behind time. So maybe Matt next. I mean, in 1 minute, what should Google or can Google do more than it's already doing? Same question to Nicole, and then a comment by Louise.
Okay, well, I try and do it in 1 minute. I try to be brief, but so 3 things. 1, we got to get our operations and our house in order. 2, partnerships with organizations and governments, and 3, tools for everyone. On the first one, you know, there's a lot been written about the impact of data centers, but actually at Google, we've been carbon neutral since 2007. We became the world's biggest purchaser of renewable energy in the corporate sector in 2017. We matched all of our electricity use with renewables, and we always try to invest in a new facility on renewables. And we announced a year ago that by 2030, we aimed for everything we do in our operations, data centers and campuses to be carbon free. We already have 2 or 3 data centers in Europe, which are running over 90% of the time on renewables only. Now, getting the last 10% is tough. And I think we all understand that we're going to have to do a lot more innovation to get there, but we've pledged to try to get there within the next 9 years. So that's our own operations. Second thing I mentioned is partnerships. I mentioned already things we're doing in AI on flooding and wildfires and with cities, but we're also working with the commercial sector too, with Unilever on supply chain, with the fashion industry, Stella McCartney and others looking at waste and configuration in business operations, and there's a lot more to come there. But then 3, and this is what's also really exciting, is helping people make smarter decisions every day. And obviously, you might think about some of the things Google does in that way. Think about Google Maps. We want to default to giving you the carbon friendly, the eco-friendly best option for any route. If there's a significant difference in duration, we'll show you the options to give you that choice. So that can nudge, we've estimated, the equivalent of 200,000 cars off the street just by people having better information around carbon impacts of their journeys. Or when you're making a big purchase, something like a heater or a boiler, to try to show you the impact of that. When you're searching for flights, to show you the carbon impact of that. So I think there's a lot we can do through how we show up for our users. So those are the kind of key things for us: our operations, getting to totally carbon free, partnerships with governments and big organizations and small businesses alike, and then thirdly, tools that help consumers make day-to-day choices that are better and smarter every day.
Thank you, Matt. Same question to you, Nicole. What can you do more as Nokia?
Yeah, I think there's no question that for ICT and for Nokia as a whole, the big topic here is how can we maximize our handprint with the enablement effect and at the same time be responsible and manage our own footprint. And so at Nokia, of course, we've recalibrated our existing targets to within the 1.5-degree warming scenario and committed to a 50% reduction in carbon emissions across our whole value chain, all 3 scopes by 2030 as part of the journey to net neutral. And I think we do that by focusing on also 3 things. The first is around driving energy efficiency improvements in our products, even as capacity grows. So for Nokia, 90% or thereabouts of our emissions come from customers using our products. And so we need to continue to address this by constantly improving energy efficiency of our products, even though the speeds and the capacity is growing all the time. And we have examples of doing that, for example, with our latest chipsets that are 50 to 75% more energy efficient, and new cooling systems, for example, for energy intensive base stations that can reduce energy by up to 70%. And thinking about fixed access technologies, we've looked at the ability to reduce broadband power consumption by 38% since 2007, even while speeds have increased by 64 times. So massive work that is being done and continues to need to be done on improving the energy efficiency of our products. At the same time, we're also looking at ways of managing the energy efficiency of our products for our customers. So last year we launched Nokia Ava energy efficiency service, which applies artificial intelligence to further reduce energy usage in 5G and multi-vendor legacy networks by up to 20%. And so I think there's a huge amount we can do in our own portfolio. And then, of course, we need to look at our own operations and how we apply sustainable practices across our own operations. And here we adopt a circular approach across our product lifecycle. So in 2020, for example, we processed 5,870 metric tons of obsolete products and parts and saved 31,600 tons of CO2 through our circular practices. And we need to continue to do that. 99% of the material in our products can be utilized and only 1% needs to be sent to landfill. And we've taken steps to improve the recycled material content in our products to improve our circularity. And that's something we need to continue doing more and more of. And then finally, I think it's true for Nokia, it's true for most of our ecosystem, is we really need to speed up the transition to renewable energy. And that's for ourselves. And we'll be saying more about that later this week, but also for our customers as well, so that we have energy efficient products that we're selling and that the energy that they are using needs to more and more be renewable.
Thank you, Nicole. Luis, I mean, there's a lot of pledges of companies by 2030, by 2040, by 2050. How does your organization monitor these pledges and whether they are actually delivered in practice?
Well, Gerard, that's a very good point. We have been listening to many promises and pledges for many years. And the problem that we have is that we do not see any accountability around that. And in GSC, as an industry initiative, and with all the work that we have been doing with our members and acknowledging that, those members have been leading the transition to a cleaner environment and to a more sustainable world. The thing is, we will not be able to achieve what we need to achieve without collective action and without aligning in the main areas that are needed to be addressed in the context of the challenge that we are facing with climate. And so using our digital repurpose report, what we have done, and I have a couple of slides, but I will not be showing them, not to disrupt the conversation. But what we have done is that we started what I call, or what is called today, the digital repurpose movement. And so the movement is about three things. It's about ambition, it's about vision, it's about ambition towards 2030, it's about achieving the sky, as I used to say, it's about moving the needle. Secondly, is about competition, is using digital technologies and the capabilities of digital companies to compete against each other to be the best in class on sustainable development. And the third one is about accountability and responsibility. And for that, what we have developed, based on the digital repurpose movement, we developed the digital repurpose report. We developed the framework that we call the digital repurpose movement that was launched during the Portuguese presidency of the EU in Lisbon, with 40 companies joining the very day that we launched the movement. And the movement is about three key pillars. The first pillar is that the companies need to change the governance that they have today, having in mind that sustainable development is a key driver of change and innovation. So we need to change that. We need to have a purpose embedded in company management, and we need to make sure that the purpose is really implemented. The second thing is that we need to acknowledge that we have many problems in our industry. We have problems with climate, with energy consumption, with circularity, with privacy and security. We have problems with supply chains. We still have child labor in our supply chains. We need to eradicate that. We need to make sure that that will no longer be tolerated. And we have the overall question about the digital divide, because as our industry is progressing, we are seeing more and more the ones that have and the ones that do have not. So, and then we have the third pillar, which is about the business opportunity, is about the enabling solutions for good. Those that my friend from Google was talking about, those solutions, and Nokia as well, those solutions that will be impacting other industry sectors, that will really change the way that they are operating. But for this to be successful, we need to join forces together. A company alone or a group of companies alone with their own sustainability agenda, with everything that they want to communicate, this will not be enough. The digital industry needs to come together with a purpose and line up with the same criteria to make sure that we compare apples with apples and peers with peers. And that's why we have been working with the European Commission, with the European Green Digital Coalition. We have the tool that can allow for the European Green Digital Coalition to measure the impact of those companies that are joining the coalition. And that's extremely important, because if we do not measure that, we will not making the progress that we need to make. And by the way, this is about making business and making money. It's about doing good and also ensuring the growth that we need, but in a sustainable manner.
Thank you, Luis. Measurement and accountability. Those are the key words. Let us turn now to some questions from the audience that have come in through Slido. I mean, there's a few popular ones that I will outline here. One is the kind of which sector. We talked about lots of sector: agriculture, energy, transport, smart cities. Which sector do you see as underrepresented by digital solutions, where you believe there could be significant progression against climate change? And maybe I can also put the second question here, and I think Bill might wish to, but others as well, like, how do we fast track the growth, the birth of ICT, clean and green technology? I mean, we look a lot at like venture capital and funding, and actually clean tech funding, it's not growing as fast as we would like to see. In some respects, it's actually decreasing compared to earlier years. So how do we address that? How do we get these technologies to market? So which sector is behind? I mean, it's the reverse of the first question, like where do you see the greatest potential, but which is behind and needs to speed up, because there can be a lot of progress made in the short term. And second one, how do we get these new technologies, the birth of new technologies, new companies, how can we accelerate that? Who would like to start with this?
I can start if you like.
Well, Nicole, go ahead.
Yeah, maybe a couple of things. To the question of which sectors, I mean, I would look at the question even a little bit differently and say that we estimate that only approximately 30% of the world's economy is digitalized, which means that 70% is more wasteful and less productive than it could and should be, and needs help in solving some of the world's biggest problems. And Luis, you mentioned, of course, climate, but also digital divide and so on. So there's a huge change that needs to happen. And when we ask how do we need to do it, I think you've heard it pretty loud from, I think, everyone on the panel today. We need to collaborate. We need different parts of the ecosystem to bring the skills and capabilities together to be able to create use cases that we can take to market quickly, to be able to solve this problem. I think, Matt, you said it brilliantly. No one can solve this by themselves. No government, no country, no company can do this by themselves. And we need a much greater degree of collaboration. And you're right, we need stimulus. Ultimately, I think at the moment, the separation of green and digitalization is actually disadvantaging progress in this area. And we need to bring those together so that we're able to drive stimulus into some of these use cases that we've been talking about that can genuinely make a difference, and stop seeing digital and green as two different things. And there's a lot of work that needs to happen there. And I think even when we look at the EU taxonomy, for example, there's a lot of work that needs to happen there as we look at how enabling industries are recognized there. But for me, at least, it's all about collaboration.
If I could just come in, because I was going to make a similar point, so I will cut myself short, because Nicole, I think, was spot on. You know, half the planet is online or just over, but half is still to come, and I'm responsible for our operations in Africa. And you know, you look at half the population globally that's responsible for less than 10% of emissions, where the impact of the climate crisis is going to be most acute. And you know, one of the things we can do is to help them digitize faster, so that they are armed with the tools. And, you know, frankly, it's a smartphone and a low-cost data connection that, you know, between us, Nicole and I could probably help with, that can really make a difference, because then people are connected to ideas and innovation and opportunity. Second thing, and Gerard, this is in your court, right, is route to scale. So one of the challenges, you know, I'm often asked, why isn't there a European Google? And you might have your view, but, you know, a digital single market would really help. And all the work you've been doing over your tireless 10 years to try to get that rulebook in place, so that there's a faster route to scale for entrepreneurs, I think can really help. And I'm sure Bill will have some views on some of the barriers to scaling for his startups. But I think Bill Gates wrote a really smart article in this morning's FT, which is all about how in Paris it was about R&D, and in Glasgow it needs to be about scaling innovation. And I think that's spot on, and policymakers have a role to play there as well.
Thank you, Matt. I mean, I could not agree more with what you just said. Otherwise, I would admit that what we're working on now wouldn't be very. I mean, would not make much of a difference, and we think it can, particularly in terms of scaling in the single market. Also, the point made by Nicole that digital and green are still seen as kind of two separate transitions, whereas they have to be seen in their interconnection. We see it also very often in the member states, for example, in the context of the recovery plan. They look at this from two different perspectives. Luis, from your perspective, I mean, what kind of which sectors do you think we should really focus on because they're not doing enough, and how can we fast track technologies?
Let's say when I look to the reports and to the research that we have been doing for the last 12 years, what I've been seeing in a quite consistent manner is that digital technologies, they impact more or less in the same way the different activity sectors. So although I must say, for me, I see two sectors as being critical for the transition that needs to happen in the next couple of years, is the power sector and the digital sector. These two sectors need to work more closely, really, to ensure the necessary transformation that we need to achieve. Of course, all the other ones will be impacted in one way or another. So if you think about agriculture and food and so on, biodiversity, natural capital, whatever you can think of. So every single thing that you apply digital technologies, you see immediately a great impact. But we also need to acknowledge that we are not doing enough. Because I heard Matt talking about Africa. The conversation about Africa, Matt, this is not new. We know what's going on there for many years, for ages. So we need to think about what kind of responsibility are we undertaking really to solve the problem that we know that exists for many time. And so as big companies, as big corporations, as the wealthiest industry in the world probably, we need to start thinking what kind of strategies do we need to implement to really to address those challenges. Because what we're talking about is opportunities, business opportunities, in fact. It's about also maybe redressing the direction of where are we going to invest really to start to minimize the gap that we are seeing in the world. So coming back to let's say to your question, I think overall digital impacts almost every single sector. From a strategic standpoint, I think that we need to bring the digital world closer to the power sector to ensure a faster transition to a greener and a better world. And when it comes to the green strategy of the European Commission and to the digital sector, the digital industry is the one that will be making Europe greener. So that's where we need to start. We need to start about investing more on digital, deploying 5G technology, really invest on new innovations. Once you start to do that, you will see a huge and a tremendous shift to a much more greener Europe and greener world. And the Fit for 55, I'm sure that will be achieved much faster than we are predicting.
Actually, I would like to chime in on that, Luis, because I think Luis has the key point for me as an investor. If I look at what played out in the United States with the building of the internet, one of the key landmark moments was the Telecom Deregulation Act of 1996. Until that moment, you had these monopoly telcos that were, they cared, but they didn't care as much as entrepreneurs that wanted to turn things, into a distributed network and blossom. So once the Telecom Deregulation Act occurred, instead of having one big phone company, you had tens of thousands of phone companies that were productive on their own, inventing new solutions, driving the future. Today, we have a power grid that is still largely like in most of the world. It's a lot like the phone networks in the 80s. And I think if there were a way to have a regulatory framework that allowed a proper deregulation so that those lines could be used by everybody, and then the green extensions, you could look at that as an explosion of ISPs. You could have all kinds of solar on houses generating electricity, putting into the grid instead of centralized power plants. I think you'd see something like the internet revolution happen to the power infrastructure, turning it very green very quickly, providing economic empowerment for a lot of people. Like you think about Africa, it would be a dumb thing to build 10 gigantic coal-fired plants per country. You'd be far better off just allowing people to put a solar on their facilities, whatever they might be, and feeding a grid. You still need that grid. So somebody's got to build out those transmission lines. But I think that would be the first thing. The second thing I think is but companies and organizations respond to their stock price. Capital markets have a way of signaling to entities what they should and shouldn't be doing. You are starting to see finally in the US markets the emergence of big green funds that will take stakes in the old line oil companies and be activists to try to take those resources and steer them towards a better future. I think a regulatory framework that also doesn't stop that encourages that would be a good thing. A tax structure that encourages that. All of those things together could draw more capital into the sector, because if those are there and the market values can be unlocked in the future, more green, more connected to the power infrastructure in positive ways, the capital will flow.
Thank you, Bill. I mean, I take away kind of two things from this, is that we absolutely have to focus on the developing world here. I mean, otherwise we'll have these technologies with us and the rest of the world won't have access to these technologies. And that requires a massive, cooperative effort. As Luis has said, we've been talking about Africa for many, many years. We've left the field entirely to the Chinese, by the way, in the meantime. And still progress has been relatively limited, and there's so much scope for kind of gains there and dynamic kind of also economic development. The other thing is bringing these different parties together. I've always, as a European Commission, we try to facilitate. I've always been very surprised that these people didn't know each other. When we brought the ICT companies together with the power companies, they'd never met. We brought kind of the transport companies together with the ICT companies that never met. So that I think is absolutely essential, that these partnerships are being forged. And I think that's where we now also see a difference. Let me we're now going into the last, say, 10 minutes of the session. And I need to, at the end, show you the results of the two polling questions. But I have like a first question, which is like, or two questions, one kind of first and then last one just before the closing. One is, you are the president of the European Commission for a day. What would you do? What's the decision that you would kind of immediately take as a European Commission to promote this technology agenda? What would you do if you were Commission President for a day? Matt, you're Commission President for a day. What would you do? Nothing pro Google, of course. I'm
not sure I'm allowed to answer that question, to be honest. I mean, I think there's digital skills, digital single market, and trying to look beyond Europe's borders, as you said, to Africa, are sort of three things I would sort of say are top of mind. I really celebrate what Europe's done in providing some leadership on the policy agenda, privacy, the kind of recovery package with digital and sustainability at its heart. But I think you go much further with really investing in the skills. In the rule book that you've been doing, I would give you carte blanche to get that kind of single market in place fast. And then I would make sure we're looking beyond our borders to build beyond our borders to Africa and the emerging markets.
Thank you. President Robertson, the European Commission, what would you do?
I would do everything Matt just said and then add a few more, because I think that they're really great. I think as well, when we think about the way legislation is evolving, and maybe if I take a step back, I think we saw with COVID as an example what can happen when governments, when companies and citizens act together to try and solve a problem. We saw a vaccine to market in just over a year instead of more than 10. I mean, really incredible things can happen when we come together. And if I was president for a day, I would look at everything Matt just said. I would look at how we can drive legislation so that we have transparency and accountability, not just for European companies, which we see coming with CSRD and some of that legislation, but also globally, so that we have true comparability and consistency and frameworks and standards working with others. And I think as well, I would do what I can to bring, and I keep saying it, but to bring this concept of green and digital together, and encourage that stimulation. I would look at trade management regulation where I could, to make sure that a circular economy can flourish, that parts can move from country to country as they need to be refurbished or whatever else, and to make sure that we get the balance right between legislation that protects, which of course we need, and the balance of being able to get new and innovative solutions to market quickly, like we saw with the COVID vaccine, so that we can start addressing some of these challenges fast.
That's an ambitious policy program for a day. Bill, you are president of the European Commission or European Union for a day. What would you do?
Well, government, I think the role of government is one to not get in the way, but also to provide a little bit of carrot and a little bit of stick to try to incentivize good behavior for society. So one, I would try to clearly define what good behavior is from this perspective of green and good for the planet. And then two, I try to put in place a little carrot and a little stick. So I think in the carrot sense, I think if there were a way to adjust tax incentives so that, or kind of, tax deductibility for investments in the areas that lead to good things for this planet, I think I would do that. And I think from a stick perspective, there's lots of examples of taxes levied on things that are not good for you, like cigarettes, or, the taxes on gas that you then parlay into things that are good for you. So I would put those in place too. So I would find a way to figure out, what's good, what's bad, put carrots in place for what's good, and the things that we know are bad, put some sort of tax levy that then goes to fund the other things that are good for this planet.
Thank you, Bill. Luis.
Well, yeah, I think, let me start by a statement. I think Europe recently, with the leadership of Ursula von der Leyen, really took a step further in terms of leadership in the global environment. We spent the last couple of years in a dialogue between the United States and China and Europe. That's at least my sense. It was lost in this process. And by putting in place the Green Deal and the Fit for 55, the European Commission harnessed an opportunity really to retake leadership in the global arena, and through a green agenda, really positioning itself in driving the global economy. Because if the European Commission really follows that agenda, there will be a major transformation taking place that will impact definitely the other blocks in the world, or at least the other two most important blocks that have been conflicting for a couple of years for now. But what is missing from my perspective is still a lack of ambition. And so if I would be the president of the European Commission right now, I would revise my Fit for 55 targets, as well I would speed up the green agenda. And I tell you why, because the clock is ticking. And if we really want to keep the world on track, if you want the business and the private sector and Europe to remain in this leading position, we really need to be more ambitious, still more ambitious, to make sure that we will bring the other sectors and the other industries and the other blocks behind us.
Thank you, Luis. Before we close, let's put on the screen the responses to the two Slido questions, your responses. So where should we focus on? This is interesting. It's an ex aequo between buildings, agriculture, smart cities, and manufacture, with energy and transport not far behind. So I think the message we're getting from the audience is focus on all of these sectors rather than maybe just on one of them. The second, well, that's an obvious one. I think also Luis gave it away a little bit by saying that the impact of digital was at least 5 times as great and nowadays 10 times as great as its footprint. So you got all of those. All of you got this question right, I think I can say. Before we conclude, because we're in the last minute of this session, I'd like to ask kind of the panelists, give us one kind of sentence in terms of what you want COP26 to agree on. What is your wish for the outcome of COP26? Of course, also relevant to this area. In one sentence, because we haven't got much more time. Bill, you are first.
to inspire billions of people to drive the political action required to make these changes happen now.
Matt, your views.
Near-term targets that keep us at 1.5% or less, but near-term, not just long-term.
Luis?
Well, I would like to see a global carbon tax in place.
Global carbon tax. Nicole?
Yeah, near-term targets that that bring everybody together and genuine encouragement and stimulus for collaboration to solve this challenge.
Excellent. Well, I'd like to thank the panelists for a very lively and interesting exchange of views. I'd like to thank the audience for participating, actively participating, posing questions and also participating to the 2 polling questions that we put to you. I cannot conclude but by saying, let's wish our leaders wisdom and success, and let's wish all of us success. It is absolutely essential that the COP26 produces a meaningful output and also takes due account of the potential of technologies in achieving the targets that need to be set. With that, thank you to all, wishing you a lovely rest of the day, lovely evening, lovely morning, wherever you are, and hope to see you soon. Goodbye.
Thank you so much. Bye, Gerard. Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay, thank you. We are not on